going to go ahead and get us started. I know it's 2 o'clock on the dot, and we still have people that are joining, which is totally perfect. And so while folks are joining, hold on one second. Let me check something to make sure I don't lose you all when I do switch it. Nope, I don't. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is do a quick poll question for our audience, and this is going to allow some time for people to still file into the virtual room here. But how do you rate your current knowledge of this topic? If folks could go in and let us know. You have a couple of options here. You have none, minimal, moderate, extensive. And so go ahead and let us know. How do you rate your current knowledge of this topic? I'm going to give people about, I'll say about another 15 seconds to provide their answers. For those virtually here, it's easy to do. Just take your mouse and you can click on the option or the little circle that's right next to your choice there. And this will indicate to us, how do you rate your current knowledge? It looks like just for everyone and our presenters joining on, we have about an even split of individuals rating their knowledge between minimal and moderate, which is great. It looks like we have people that are falling into the minimal moderate area here, and it looks like that they are that they will get quite a bit from this particular today's presentation and today's webinar. All right, great. All right, thank you all for providing that. So I'm going to go ahead and switch us back. I'm going to end the poll here. Thank you for completing that. And let me switch us back to our presentation here just to welcome everyone. So again, thank you for joining for today's webinar, Comprehensive Gang Model, Building Impactful Collaboration Through Community Mobilization. My name is William Moore, and I'm with OJJDP's INTAC. And before we get started with today's webinar, what I want to do is provide a few housekeeping items to keep in mind prior to us starting this presentation. Please note that today's webinar will indeed be recorded, and we will have it located on our INTAC YouTube page. Feel free to go to the YouTube page to look at past webinars that we've archived from other events, including webinars that we've done with our colleagues with NGC. If you'd like access to any supporting materials, you may contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk to get access to any of those supporting materials that we have there. A couple of quick webinar tips. If you'd like to download a copy of important handouts or documents related to today's webinar, you may do so in the Handouts pod. It's labeled 915 Handouts. You can simply click on the name of the file and then click the download button, and it will download the document directly to your system. If you need access or are having any troubles, just let us know in the chat pod, and we can help assist you to get access to any of those documents that we have there in our handouts pod. Please note that we will have a question and answer session during today's webinar, where we will have time to address questions that were presented prior to today's webinar, but then we will also present or address questions that are posed during the webinar. To submit your question to our presenters and to our panelists, please just simply type your question into the chat pod and select enter or hit the bubble icon, and you would have successfully submitted your questions. Feel free to submit questions during the presentation. Now, for those who are signed in virtually, please note that you will indeed receive a certificate of attendance for your you being here in the virtual room. However, if you're joined in the group, please note that individuals who are just viewing with you in the group, they will not receive a certificate of attendance. Instead, what you'll have to do is download the group validation form in the handouts pod and submit that to OJJDP TTA at usdoj.gov to allow for individuals who are not signed in and who are viewing the webinar with you where you are, in order for them to get access to the webinar certificate. For those who are joined in the group, let's take a few moments to, just a quick minute to get a count of everyone. If you are viewing with an additional person or other people, please type the total number of additional people in the room with you today. For example, if it is me and let's say my mom watching today's webinar, I will put 1 because in addition to me, I have 1 additional person watching today's webinar. So please indicate any additional people that are in the room with you today by typing in the number that are additionally with you. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our moderator for today to provide a welcome. That is Ms. Steffi Rapp. She will provide a welcome for today's webinar. Stephanie, whenever you are ready, take it away.
Thank you, William. Again, my name is Steffi Rapp, and I am with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention within the Special Victims and Violent Offenders Division. On behalf of OJJDP, I would like to welcome you all and thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for today's discussion. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on the Office of Justice Programs and OJJDP. The Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention is a component of the Office of Justice Programs within the U.S. Department of Justice. OJP's program offices include the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the National Institute of Justice, the Office of Victims of Crime, OJJDP, and the Office of Sex Offender Sentencing, Monitoring, Apprehending, Registering, and Tracking. At OJJDP, we envision a nation where our children are free from crime and violence, and if they come into contact with the justice system, the contact should be both just and beneficial to them. By supporting states, local communities, and tribal jurisdictions in your efforts to develop and implement effective programs for juveniles, our office strives to strengthen the juvenile justice system's efforts to protect public safety, hold offenders accountable, and provide services that address the needs of youth and their families. OJJDP funds a suite of gang programs which include the Youth Gang Intervention Diversion Program, designed to change community members' attitudes regarding violence, provide youth with alternatives to gang membership, and educate them about the risks of gang involvement. The Youth Gang Suppression Program helps communities gather and share data about their gang problem so that they can develop effective responses to and sustain reductions in youth violence. The Supporting Victims of Gang Violence Program helps service providers identify, treat, and seek justice for victims. And this year, we funded the comprehensive anti-gang programs for youth, focusing on intervention and suppression. With funding support from OJJDP, the National Gang Center, managed by the Institute for Intergovernmental Research, has provided national leadership, coordination, and resources to help communities prevent and respond to gang violence. I thank the great staff of the National Gang Center for their dedication in preparing today's webinar. Here listed are the objectives of the webinar today. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's panel of subject matter experts. Their full bios are located in the handout section. We're going to start today with Dr. Celeste Vojdalevich, who's a Senior Research Associate with the Institute for Intergovernmental Research. In this role, she works with the National Gang Center to provide training and technical assistance to communities implementing the OJJDP Comprehensive Gang Model. Earlier in her career, she was project director for one of the original comprehensive gang model sites based in Riverside, California, a project recognized nationally for successful outcomes and for its fidelity to the model. We will also hear from Mr. Sean Baldwin, who is a Senior Research Associate with IIR as well. In this role, he works with the National Gang Center supporting law enforcement anti-gang training, as well as providing training and technical assistance to communities implementing the OJJDP Comprehensive Gang Model. Prior to working with IIR, he served 25 years in law enforcement, serving his last 9 years as Chief of Police for Fort Pierce, Florida. We will also hear from Paul Callanan, who is the president of the Calanon Group, LLC, working with federal, state, and local partnerships to develop innovative solutions for safer communities. He has 30 years of experience within the criminal justice field, specializing in sustainable gang violence reduction efforts. He provides guidance to system-level partnerships and community-led collaborations, seeking comprehensive, outcome-driven solutions to complex public safety and social issues. We will also hear from Rhonda Eccles, who currently serves as the Community Resources Coordinator for the Newport News, Virginia Police Department's Community and Youth Outreach Division. In her role, she focuses on creating working relationships between the community and law enforcement and offers various community education programs. And finally, we'll hear from Jay Franklin, who is a safety manager gang specialist for the Riverside County, California Office of Education, providing oversight and development of school safety protocols and interventions. As one of the original street outreach workers to implement the comprehensive gang model, he has more than 20 years of extensive experience working with youth, families, and communities. I will now turn it over to Celeste from the Gang Center, the National Gang Center.
Thank you, Steffi. And
sure.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to some. So I'm going to provide an overview of the comprehensive gang model. As you can see from this map, OJJDP has funded in numerous sites. You will see that there are some that have been previously funded that are in that darker blue and some that are currently funded. The majority of these are in urban areas. However, there are sites that have been funded in those that are under 50,000. And the program has been implemented across the United States and started really in the model was introduced in the early 1990s and the implementation started around 1995, so it's been around for quite some time. Let's talk about some of the key facts about the model. It's designed for areas with serious violent gang problems, and usually that is determined either through an assessment or the community is well aware of some of the issues that they've been dealing with. It's also based on data that's available to show the extent of the gang problem in the community. It's for use primarily with young adults and teenage gang members, so it's not intended for adult gang members, or some would consider like for motorcycle gangs or for prison gangs. So it's really for those that are primarily the target age group over time has been between the ages of 12 and 24, and that's generally the case for most areas that have implemented this model. It's an adaptable framework that can be molded to fit the needs of the community. That being said, there are tenets of the model that need to be adhered to in order for it to be effective. Steffi mentioned the fidelity of the model, and that is a key factor in how successful the program will be. If you deviate too much from that, you may not find the same level of successful outcomes. So that is one key feature that is really, really important. And what we found over time is that those programs that have implemented it with fidelity tend to have better outcomes, meaning a reduction in gang crime or, sorry, I've gone too many. Okay, so meaning a reduction in crime or changes in the behavior of youth that are being targeted through this model. So the target of the model obviously are gangs, youth, and family, and then community. And I'm going to focus a little bit on community because there are various definitions of what community is. It's generally a group of people living within the same geographic area. However, if we dig deeper, though, it's a group of people living in the same geographic area, and they have relationships, they hold relationships, and they have a sense of identity and connectedness. So in this graphic right here, we'll see in this chart that there are tiers to the responses in addressing the gang issues. So you have primary prevention, which focuses on the entire population, and those conditions that contribute to gang violence. You have a secondary prevention, as you see, and that's the high-risk youth. It's aimed at those at greater risk of becoming involved. And then you have gang intervention. Those are for gang-involved youth, and that generally involves activities that would include street outreach, some kind of targeted intervention. And then finally, you have targeted enforcement, and that would be focused mostly on the gang leaders and those that are serious and chronic offenders. And so we can talk here a bit about this strategic collaboration, and part of this the comprehensive gang model is having a steering committee, and it is comprised of agencies and people who are leaders in various organizations. So as you can see from this chart, there's law enforcement, there are community leaders, faith-based organizations are very much a part of this collaboration, city county leadership, probation and parole, community outreach which would probably include some type of street outreach, worker agency, somebody that's had experience in that area. The schools, obviously, and probably it would be the schools within those target areas that you're looking at. And it would be in the targeted communities, and then health and social services, as well as employment agencies, and last but not least, there may or may not be a research partner. But a research partner would be important because you're going to be this is a data-driven initiative, which you're going to be looking at the data not only in terms of your gang issues in the community, but also your strategies and how successful you are in implementing those strategies and affecting change within the population that you're serving. So all of these leaders that you bring into this strategic collaboration are really going to be focused on the gang violence issues. So whether it's probation or schools, they're all going to be very interested and focused on reducing gang violence in the community. So project leaders are key to this entire process. And here is a little bit about the comprehensive gang model structure. We talked about the community, so the community is very much involved. If we start at the steering committee level, that is the chart that I just showed you before. It is, again, it's those leaders, those policy makers, decision makers. They're really important. They're the people that can make a decision at the table, and they have a clear understanding of what the issues are. Underneath that would be the project coordinator, and this is the person that is going to be guiding the day-to-day activities of the team. And this is a very important role. It would be somebody that has experience either in juvenile justice, social services, someone that comes from a key area that is very in tune with what's happening in the community and on the streets. From there, you have an assessment work group. Again, we're talking about this is a data-driven project. So in that assessment work group, you would be looking at data that comes from various agencies. It can be school data. It could include definitely police data, data from probation, community perception data. There's various types of data that you would be looking at. And then, of course, your research partner, who may come from a local university. It may be somebody that has already worked on your team and can help you in assessing the data and monitoring the progress of your initiative. And then you would move into, once you have that assessment, you have a clear understanding of your target population your target area, you would move into implementation. And the implementation piece would involve prevention, intervention, and suppression activities. And those activities are it's very balanced in its approach. You can't have one without the other. So you really want to rely on your team to work together to make sure that the youth and the families are given the services that they need. At the same time, you want to protect the community and ensure public safety. So street outreach is really a key component of the comprehensive gang model. We've heard of many different programs that have workers, people that work in the community, but the street outreach worker is more than a mentor because they're out on the street. They work with the families. They understand the gang violence that's occurring in the community, and they are constantly in contact with the youth and their families. And they are also engaged with the intervention team. The intervention team is comprised of members that were represented on the steering committee, but they're more of the workers. They're the ones that come in contact, in daily contact, or regular contact, I should say, with the target population. So it could be a juvenile probation officer who has some youth that are identified as gang involved on their caseload. It could be a school resource specialist who has contact with the youth at school. It can be mental health professionals who are servicing the family and the youth. And it could be employment agencies that are helping the youth and helping them with their skills and getting the job. So you have a team effort in trying to affect change in the youth and also protecting the community. So even at that intervention team meeting, I would say that there's an opportunity to share safety concerns, issues that are happening on the street, to protect everyone involved and to ensure that that everyone is getting the types of services that they need, very tailored services. So it's a great opportunity for all these agencies to come together on what they know about the youth and how to best help them. So now we'll move into, I discussed this a bit, these are the balance of activities, prevention activities. They may be for those that are not involved in gangs, but they've been identified at risk for becoming gang involved. So there's a number of tutorial, let's say you might have tutorial services, you might have gang awareness seminars that are provided to family and youth. You could have a multitude of services provided that are aimed at the general population. And then intervention activities, these are aimed at the gang-involved youth. This may involve some type of therapeutic activities. It can involve recreational activities. Again, the number one resource I think here is the outreach team that provides them with targeted prevention, care, and access to services. A big portion of the comprehensive gang model is also to ensure that youth have access to needed services, as well as working with the families. It's not just working with the youth involved in the project, but it's also involved. It also involves working with the family members. And then there are suppression activities. These are targeted enforcement efforts that are, again, to target the activities of those serious offenders, because we also want to be sure that the community is safe and to ensure that the youth that are in the community are also safe. So this can be very targeted activities in those targeted communities. And these are the 5 core strategies of the model. Community mobilization, which is community engagement and collaboration. Opportunities provision, which is education, training, and employment programs. Social intervention, which is outreach and access to provision of services to gang-involved youth and their families. And suppression activities, which involves community policing with formal and informal controls and accountability measures. And organizational change and development, a policy for effective use of resources. And this can really lead to, again, greater access for needed services for youth and families. And with all of those strategies, everyone that I mentioned, whether they're on the steering committee or on the intervention team, has a part to play, whether it's in suppression. Let's just use that as an example, is holding youth accountable for their actions is a part of everyone involved, as well as when we look at social intervention, that's also a part of everyone being involved in the team, whether it be law enforcement or street outreach workers. So this portion is about community mobilization. So community mobilization, what is community mobilization? It's community engagement and collaboration. It's engaging community stakeholders through the process of understanding the youth gang problem and developing comprehensive solutions to address it. So it educates community members about the youth gang problem, drives community involvement and input, builds impactful collaborations between agencies and the communities they serve, and it unifies community stakeholders as they create solutions through long-term systemic change. As this process, I would say, as this process is community-driven, it creates a sense of autonomy, I think, and ownership because the community can then tailor their action to the specific needs. And then one of the things about community mobilization as it relates to the model is it draws on the expertise and the strengths of the community members. And it also reduces redundancy in services because people are working collaboratively, so they join in their efforts to reduce repetition or, again, like redundancy. And I would say also that the collaboration that emerges also results in a shift maybe in the social norms in the community. So who should be involved? Service providers, definitely advocates and champions in the community, faith-based leaders, youth, teen leaders, youth in the targeted area, and gang members should also be involved. Outreach workers definitely will be involved, and community leaders. And again, all those representatives from the steering committee and residents in the community for sure. So these are all the members that should be involved in community mobilization efforts, and they all play a role. So we want to make sure that whoever is involved, that it's representative of the community, that it's representative racially, ethnically, and you show the diversity in the community, and you engage everyone in the process and provide them with a voice and give them a voice at the table. So what are the benefits of community mobilization? Again, it affords everybody a community voice, offers those most impacted a role at the table. It improves access to resources, which is really key, recognizes the diversity of expertise, services, and experience of community stakeholders. And it facilitates youth involvement, and again, there's a place at the table for the voice of gang members or those that are gang involved to also state, what they want to as it relates to this process. And it provides ways to engage community members, and it helps you to initiate discussion groups, provides opportunities for meetings and canvassing, and it also improves community and police relationships. So this is just a way to look at community mobilization in action. These are just some examples. So for community, there's volunteerism, there's youth-oriented initiatives, someone developing an initiative where youth can actually be engaged and they can have some say in what is being structured in their community. community meetings, marches, vigils, and educational programs as well. For the schools, you could have surveys, focus groups, just a real understanding of what's important, what's really happening, what are the concerns of youth and parents as well. Partnering with alternative schools to include them as well, and after-school programs, and providing meeting space. These are all very, very important. As far as employment, community employer networks can be engaged in this process, providing opportunities for youth, whether there be career fairs, professional development, job skills training, and mentoring. And we've seen this throughout with businesses in many of these programs where business leaders have been engaged and they've wanted to offer either mentorship or provide opportunities to youth to give them a shot at maybe a job that they work part-time in and see how they do, and give them some tips on how to become a better employee. And then finally, law enforcement, community-oriented policing, having community forums where it gives people the opportunity to discuss concerns, share whatever it is they want to in an open space, training on gang issues, and then, of course, establishing neighborhood watches. And now I'd like to turn it over to Sean.
Thank you, Celeste. Awesome overview of the comprehensive gang model. So there are slides up here. So we have an opportunity. We have 3 experts from across the country that have actual on-the-ground experience with the comprehensive gang model and building community collaboration. So we've got some questions that we're going to ask of them to get their input. And I want to remind everybody that if you have specific questions, put them in the chat box. And we've got some staff online that's going to look at those, and hopefully we can get to a lot of those questions after we finish the panel discussion portion of this. We've got about 400 attendees online, so it's awesome to see so many people that are concerned and looking for answers to gang problems and building community collaboration. So with that, we're going to get to our questions. And our first question is, can you provide us with examples of how implementing community mobilization impacted your community? And I think I'm going to start with Miranda from Newport News, Virginia. Miranda?
So good afternoon, everyone. So an example that we had in terms of utilizing community mobilization is that when we first started planning for our project, we thought that it was important that we hold some listening sessions in the community. So our city, Newport News, Virginia, is a council manager government, which means our city is run by our city manager, the highest level of government. And so because the program was coming out of a governmental office, we wanted to make sure that the community knew that this was something that needed to be owned by the community and not just the government trying to take over. So in our planning, we went to the various areas of the city to engage them in the process. Newport News itself is about 26 miles long, and it's divided up into 3 distinct districts, which is the northern part of the city, the central part of the city, and the southeast part of the city. In terms of our data told us that where we needed to start the program and where the highest concentration of gang-related violence was in the southeast part of the city. And again, although we knew that we were going to be focusing on the southeast part of the city, it was important that we engage the entire city because we needed the resources for everyone. And so we held 3 listening sessions, again, 1 in each particular part of the city so we can engage them. And so in those sessions, we had people who first explained what it is we were doing, why we were adopting the gang model, and what it is that we wanted to accomplish. We also had speakers from the various sets of the community. So we had faith-based leaders, we had law enforcement leaders, we had business leaders. Of course, you had myself as the program manager, and then we also had members from the community itself to show that in order for this to work, it's going to take everybody. So then after we had an opportunity to hear from everybody, we wanted to hear from the community. Because again, if this was going to work, we needed the community to understand that this is a partnership, that we were having with you all and not just something to come in and take over. So we wanted to hear what the community wanted to see. What do you all think were the issues that were plaguing the community as it relates to gang violence? And then more importantly, as the community, how could you all partner with us to make sure that this is work? Because if it's just government only, it's not going to work. And so we needed to make sure that the community understood that they were an integral part of the process. And so then we also know that sometimes government can be guilty of just asking the community what they wanted and then not following through with what the community wanted to say. So we also made sure that it was important that we went back to the community and put together a formal document and say, you know, here's what we heard you all say. Here's what we feel like we can do. Here's how we can implement this work together, and then continue to engage the community throughout the process. And one last thing that we did in one of the listening sessions, so again, the southeast part of the city, which has the highest concentration of poverty, which also has the highest concentration of violence, is where we started the program. When we did our listening session in the northern part of the city, sometimes some of the residents in the northern part of the city can feel like, I don't live in the southeast, so it's not my problem. In order for us to eradicate this issue, we needed to make sure that the members in the northern part of the city understood that although you may not live in the southeast, some of the issues that plague the southeast are working their way up into the north. And so if we wait until it hits your backyard, it's going to be too late. So when we went to do one of our listening sessions in the northern part of the city, once we finished, we actually went on a community walk in the northern part of the city. And we purposely went to an area that kind of mimic the northern part of, the southern part of the city. So those in the north can see that, again, some of these issues that we were trying to address in the southeast part of the city, although you didn't hear about it as much in the northern part of the city, it still happened. And so that gave those in the northern part of the city the opportunity to see how they were vital to this process as well. And so again, even though we wasn't just focusing on the neighborhood at the time, they were still vital to be a part of the solution. So they got an opportunity to see that, one, not just by attending a listening session so we can hear from them, but also providing them the opportunity to kind of get their hands dirty and get on the ground and actually see what was going on. And so that was kind of two things that we did to involve the community in our work.
Awesome. So really bringing the community in from the very beginning and making sure everybody understands what their role is. Critical component. Great first step. Paul, how about in Denver?
Good afternoon, everybody. You know, I can't overemphasize the importance of building a sound, strong partnership with the community when addressing gang violence. In Denver, the city took an approach of engaging community stakeholders very early on in the process. And what we found was that providing an opportunity for a community voice and a community presence through all phases of the project, you know, planning, development, implementation, evaluation, readjustment, built a sense of trust with the project itself. There was no hidden agendas, there was accountability, there was transparency. And the second benefit to it was by allowing community mobilization or community organizations to design and take a lead or own community strategies, it brought a sense of legitimacy to the project. Not only were voices being heard, the community voice being heard, but it was actually being put in action. So it built a lot of trust in our project. I wanted to give you maybe two examples of community-led mobilization that we did in Denver. One short-term, one long-term. The short-term was our Safe Summer, Safe Holly. So Holly Square was a small area that was experiencing a large amount of gun violence heading into the summer months. The square consisted of a liquor store where a lot of gang members in that area congregated, thus made an easy source for drive-by shootings. The problem was that across the street from the liquor store, there was a Boys and Girls Club, there was a recreation center, and a public library. Utilization heading into the summer was minimal. People were just scared to go there. So the community took charge. They created a 90-day campaign. Basically what they said is that for 90 days, we don't want a single shooting in this neighborhood. And they came together and they designed their campaign. Their campaign consisted of different elements. One was to sort of redesign the traffic flow in that area. They actually came together and decided to work with Public Works and the police department, shut down a main street that prevented the drive-by shootings from happening. They also created events every single weekend at that area to bring community members together and build advocacy amongst people and just a sense of community and provide a sense of community. And the third thing they did was critically important is they developed a plan where they outreached to all the gangs in that area, not only individuals that lived in that area, but the target gangs that were coming into the area doing the shootings, and said, this is what we're doing. And for 90 days, We want peace. We want our kids to live in safety. We want them to enjoy the amenities at the square. We have a zero tolerance. You're welcome to be part of this. You're part of our community. We want to help you, but we have a zero tolerance. Collectively, we have a zero tolerance. And amazingly, in 90 days, there wasn't a single shooting in that neighborhood. So it was a perfect example of a short-term ability of the community to take ownership. Long-term was more of a faith-led effort of how do we deal with trauma of individuals that are impacted by exposure to gang violence. And our faith-based organizations took a lead on that. They built a church network in our city that responds to gang shootings. Whenever there's a shooting, churches close by will open up its doors and staff with pastors and staff with mental health volunteers, and they provide sort of this mini triage center where individuals can go. Often people are scared. Often people are afraid. If my child saw something and I need to speak to somebody, but I don't want them to be a witness, it's a safe place to go to the church. So it served as a triage center where people can come. They got spiritual or emotional assistance. They're educated on understanding how trauma, and they were referred to resources. Huge success, and both these examples are examples of community mobilization that can be done at minimal cost, and that's what was really important because both projects have been replicated and continue today.
Yeah, Paul, good examples. One is most communities that are looking for solutions want to do something right away. And then you also got to look at the long term. So the 90 days without a shooting in a city that large is incredible. Congratulations on that. That's a great example. So Jay is with us from Riverside, California. He is a street outreach expert, and he may have a little different perspective on this. Jay, what do you got from Riverside?
Yeah, hello everyone. The community mobilization piece, coming from a street outreach standpoint, and we work hand in hand with gang members and their families, on a daily basis. The hardest relationship with community mobilization and bringing things together was some of the families, or the majority of the families in law enforcement. And with the recent unrest and social unrest and things that's going on today, from day one of the comprehensive gang model, we worked on that. We constantly worked on that every day. So when things came up, we were already prepared. We were prepared to deal with those things as they come up. And in communities, a lot can go on. A lot can go on, and there's misconceptions, and there's things out there that may not be true. So what I learned along the years is that we became that bridge. We became that bridge and that balance to make sure that our communities could be better. A couple of examples I have. We had a situation where a young man was murdered. Anyone that works in communities, certain families matter. And he was from a family that mattered. Whole family was involved. The neighborhood loved the family, and they loved his kid. He was young, and he was hurt or harmed. He was murdered. So with that, there was just a lot of tension in the community. So the day of the funeral, which was huge for the community, when everyone was arriving to the funeral home, all they seen was law enforcement taking his brother, who was in custody, away in handcuffs right before the ceremony started. So the community was already in an uproar, but then when they seen this, they was like, how disrespectful is that? They didn't even let him stay for the funeral. Why would they do him like that? And all they seen was a young man walking out crying. When in all actuality, what law enforcement did was they brought the young man and the family in 2 hours earlier where they could spend special time requested by the mother with his brother that was actually murdered. So we were able to get that message back to the community, and it really went a long way. Of recent, just last week, we had a situation where at one of our school sites, there was a man that was mentally ill. And he came on the school site, and he actually, he was trying to get in. He was trying to get into the school. He was trying to harm staff. We don't know what his actual intent was, but it wasn't good. So in the midst of that, law enforcement showed up. So when law enforcement showed up, it was 2 officers. And they talked to this man. They worked with the man. They really just tried to get him to go away, and he wouldn't leave. And he actually went for the officer's gun on 3 occasions. He rushed the officers and tried to grab their gun. And he couldn't get the gun, but he kept making attempts. These officers were so good with him that when everything was said and done, they took him into custody. But it was one of those situations where if it would have been on the other side, you know, we definitely would have addressed that. And for my program and for the community mobilization piece, our thing was, instead of it just being an incident that happened, we need to let law enforcement, we need to let the community know that this is something where the officers actually did what we felt was a really good thing.
Jay, I got to ask you this. So you've been involved in the comprehensive gang model and the street outreach for how long?
25 years.
25 years. Do you think that the work that you have done, your community has done in the last 25 years has maybe somehow helped prevent some of the unrest and just devastation that has happened in other communities across the nation? Just I'm talking about here recently in the last few months.
Yes, most definitely. The first week of the unrest, when the protest was really popular and things were going on, something that happened in our community that I think was kind of rare, they pulled law enforcement, our community organizations, our NAACP, and the street outreach worker component, they pulled us all together before the first protest and before anything happened that weekend, that there was a lot of violence going on. We had one of the biggest protests number-wise in Southern California, over 6,000 people. But the fact, I feel that it really helped. And just that phone call alone, knowing that we could all sit around the table and discuss what's best for our community, it was definitely due to the years that we paved the way for this.
Great input. Thank you, Jay. So I'm going to move on to our next question here. And that is, what challenges will communities face in implementing community mobilization, and what advice can you offer to overcome these challenges? If each of you could give us one or two challenges that you think may be helpful for people as they're planning. Jay, since we got your attention, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, the number one challenge, it's a huge challenge, is trust. You know, when a program comes into a community, the number one challenge is going to be trust. And most communities feel it's just another program. You coming in here, we've heard that, been there, done that. What's your intent? You know, what's your real purpose in this? And a lot of times when new programs come aboard, the community looks at it as if it's just something to come in and collect some numbers and some data to, you know, get some funds somewhere else, but it never really comes back to the hood. And that was a real tough one for us to overcome. One of the ways of overcoming that, though, is by the work that we do. You know, just being there and on a daily basis, just really, really letting them see the success stories and really the whole goal of your program. When we're talking about programs that specifically working with gangs, that was our focus. And a lot of communities are like, wow, you guys are really just honed in on this specific population. And once they start seeing that and seeing that within this model, we're not going nowhere. We're going to be here. We're going to work with this population, and we're going to stay here. And once they start seeing that, it really goes a long way. And to overcome that struggle or challenge, I feel that when we had a high level of commitment, and they seen how we was committed to the gang problem or the gang issues in their community, it made other organizations step their game also. Because one of the huge things for this particular model is that we have all the higher level decision makers around the table. Once these other organizations within the community are seeing like, wow, that is the go-to program, and how can we connect? And in our lane, how can we work with what they're doing and make our community better? So once we got to that point and the wheels started rolling, it was just good for us as a program, good for the community, which ultimately is good for the young people.
Awesome. Thank you. So building trust, staying committed, and I guess giving an example, helping the non-profit organizations in the community, helping them out, helping them make sure, holding them accountable, making sure that they're providing the services that need to be provided. That's awesome. Yeah, it felt like you were talking about the community that I work in with the comprehensive gang model when you were talking. Yeah. So Miranda, how about in Newport?
So one challenge that you will have to overcome is making sure that the community understands what you're doing. You can't ask the community to be a part of the solution when they don't know what it is that you're doing. So it's important to make sure that you're constantly talking about the work that you're doing and you're constantly involving the community in the work that you're doing. Again, particularly because in the area that we were starting in, because it was the highest concentration of gang, but it was also the highest concentration of particularly African-American males in the community. So coming out of government, it was important that the community understood that by us implementing the model, it wasn't just a way to come in and arrest all the young black boys in the community. That was the total opposite of what we were doing. And so we needed to make sure that it was important to get out in front of that message and that the community understood that this wasn't a way to arrest all of the young black boys in the community, because we know we cannot arrest our way out of the problem. But this is a way for us to be able to come in and partner with the community and to be able to provide some solutions and to be able to provide some help to those who need it the most. Because oftentimes when you hear the word gang member, it's always a negative connotation that's attached to them, and people just feel like, again, you just want to lock them up and throw away the key. And so it was important that the community understood that this wasn't just a lock them up and get them away, but this is a way to figure out how can we partner with the community to be able to provide resources and to be able to provide interventions to young people who needed our help the most. Now, sure enough, as you saw in Select's presentation, there is a suppression effort to it, which means that there are some people in the community who don't need to be locked up. If you need to be locked up, part of your community mobilization strategy is explaining why. Of course, in criminal prosecutions, you can't tell everything, but it's important to understand that the community understands that some people just need to be off our street. And so by you constantly involving the community, you're also building community allies who can spread that message for you and who can be able to go in places where you may not be able to go into. And I'll say one last thing that you will have to overcome is making sure that you are able to do what you say you're going to do, when you say you're going to do it, and how you say you're going to do it. That means that sometimes you may have some political will who may want to pull you in various directions. And so after you do your assessment and after you get your plan, if your plan says, you need to stay in this particular area for 3 or 4 years in order for you to see a reduction, it's important that you stay in that area. So when you start to do good work, obviously people are going to want to pull you to and fro. So a challenge will be making sure that you stay where you say you're going to stay and do what you said you're going to do, because that's another way that you build the trust of the community. So if you pull your resources away too fast, you're going to have community saying, well, you said you was going to do this, but you didn't do it. And it's because you moved too quick. So a challenge will be while you're doing good work, to make sure that, you stick to what you said you were going to do, regardless of who's trying to pull you in a different direction, so you can get the results that you say you want to get, and understand that this is not quick work. It takes time. It takes time to change behaviors. It takes time to change these habits. And so, again, the more that you can involve the community, the more they can speak for you, the more they can be your advocate in getting this work done.
Good. Awesome. Thank you, Mona. And that goes back to the whole issue of making sure everybody understands. So back to the whole balance to prevention, intervention, and the enforcement or suppression, is that you have to have all three. And all three have a place. It's not, I tell chiefs all the time, you'll never arrest your way out of this problem. It just won't happen. Right. So thank you for that input. Paul, what do you got for challenges?
Yeah, from an administrative point of view, I think a big challenge when dealing with community-led strategies or programs is sustainability. Often we have these great ideas and we go out and we get grant funding and we put the programs in place, and at the end of the funding cycle, we have no money left, right? And there's no thought about how we're going to sustain these services, and that causes a lot of problems. And sort of to piggyback off of what both Jay and Rhonda were saying is you spend so much time building trust with the community and involving them in the project, but after the funding cycle, they tend to get cut out, right? There's no more money left, so they cut them out. So you destroy trust. So the population that's being served, they no longer feel like, hey, I'm not a priority to the city or to the project, or the agencies that were providing services tend to, rightfully so, feel like we didn't really add value in your point of view because we're no longer being funded. And it's a tough situation to be in, but I think steps can be taken at the early stages of planning to prevent that from happening. And too often we look at these ideas and we look at other cities and say, hey, look, we want to do that, or we want to do this. Well, you don't have the resources to do it. So the first step of planning for any community is look at what resources you currently have in the community and what can you put together on that. So that could be, you're looking at existing funding resources, partnerships in the community, what people are doing. You have a wide range of experts. So how do you bring them together and create new partnerships, new strategies without bringing in outside funding? Then you can ensure that those programs are going to be in place over time. The model itself calls for organizational change and development if you're going to participate in this. And that means you have to be open as an agency, whether you're law enforcement, community, when you're sitting down, we're open to doing things different. And whether that's on assigning personnel, whether that's, lending office space, whether that's giving service dollars I have for clients out to other agencies to use, there's ways to do it. So this example would be, design something that's already sustainable and then put it in place. And then, save your wish ideas for when you do have funding and make it clear that maybe we can't fund these down the line. It's a great advice for communities that have no resources. It's great advice for communities that have cash flow funds. We're all in that right now, with the virus and how it's impacting the economy and stuff. So stick to what can be done, and you'll be amazed with the amount of resources during the assessment phase that you have in your community that you can just partner and do a better job.
Awesome, great thoughts for sure. Sustainability is definitely an issue. So let's move on to our third question. We've got, just for our panelists, we've got about 6 minutes left here, so if you could give time your answers appropriately, I appreciate that. So, and for the participants, we're going to move from this. We'll bring Celeste back, and we'll do a question and answer with you, get some of your questions answered. So stand by for that for sure. So question number 3, why should communities adopt the comprehensive gang model to reduce problems with youth street gangs? So this is bigger picture. Why should a community look to the model as something that they should use in their community? And we'll start with Jay. How about you?
Wow. Especially with the climate today. I've always said this for 25 years, but the climate today, when we're in a position to heal or ruin a lot of situations. And the comprehensive gang model ultimately is bringing people together to collaborate and communicate. Because one piece of it, a lot of communities, they're saying, let's get together. So they just get together, let's address some of these serious issues that's going on right now. But to get together and also to appropriately communicate is what this particular model trains you to do, how to sit around the table. I'm saying from 25 years where I've seen this thing evolve, for me coming from the street outreach standpoint and law enforcement on the other side of the table, it was 2 different worlds. It was 2 different worlds. And to see how it can come together on both sides, where it's not lopsided on one or the other, but coming together for the community. So I feel that this is the answer to a lot of things that communities are searching for today.
Awesome, thank you. Paul, what's your perspective on this?
I'm experienced with a lot of the different gang models that are out there, and what I believe in the comprehensive gang model is that it's the best cross-sector collaborative approach to reducing violence. And the reason why I say that is because the structure of the model itself. It provides a structure for a wide variety of strategies and solutions. It doesn't just focus on one entity of law enforcement or enforcement itself, but covers a range of responses from prevention, intervention, to reentry, to suppression across the board. It calls for a diverse group of stakeholders that have equal ownership of the project, which is critical for engaging communities and sustainability. So not one person owns or one agency owns the project. It's multiple agencies participate in the steering committee, and they can guide that project in any direction. Celeste mentioned earlier on, it's an adaptable framework that can adjust in the middle of a project. If you have an increase of a new sector of driving violence, you can easily adjust your resources to that and address that problem. There's a wide variety of benefits to using it, especially at this time right now, where there's a call to how do we reimagine public safety. The model itself is a solution to that. It allows you to look at any public safety issue, beyond gangs too. You can look at human trafficking, opioid use. You can look at homeless situations, and it provides a model to say, look, we have all these partners in the community that are experts at what they do. How do we bring them together and develop the most efficient and most effective response to the social issues that we're pertaining to? And that's why I just think it's a great model.
Right, and just to sort of reinforce what you said, Paul, I know what was important in our community is that the model doesn't specifically prescribe programs. In other words, the community can use the resources it has and develop the programs that they need to do prevention, intervention work, and suppression in their community. So it's a model, it's a framework, it's not a specific program. And that's important for people to remember for sure.
If you look at the adaptability of it, if you look at Celeste said 1993, the gangs in 1993 are completely different than the gang structures that we see today. A lot of hybrid gangs, a lot of hybrid organizations. Yet the model itself can still be utilized for the new structure of the gangs that we're looking at.
Awesome. So Miranda, what's your take from the East Coast?
So mine would be that adopting the gang model provides a framework for you to follow. So, you know, when you talk about how can you reduce gangs and how can you provide intervention, it's a huge thing to take on. And sometimes because the problem seems so large, you can get kind of lost in the struggle and get lost in the process. And so for us, the gang model provided us that roadmap. You know, it gave us specific steps in which we can follow and how to address this problem. Like, do your assessment so you can find out exactly what your problem is, and you can find out where your target area needs to be. And then it provides a way to be able to bring other people to the table, like with your steering committee, because, again, you need everybody that's involved in this process. It gives you a way to be able to measure your outcomes, you know, because it's okay to say, you know, I'm doing good work, but can you prove that you're doing good work? You know, so by following the model, it gives you a step-by-step process on how to come up with some of your outcomes and how to track some of those outcomes, how to report that data out to the community. As Paul said, it gives you a way to kind of evaluate what you're doing, and if it's not working, it gives you that opportunity to kind of be able to go back to the table and figure out what's not working or how you need to involve yourself back in the process to remodel. And it gives a justification, you know, to what you're doing. You know, we had to do presentations to our city council, which is our funding, so it provided the justification for the funding. You know, because when your funding runs out, if you can't prove what you're doing or why you're doing it or how you're doing it, your funding may dry up. So again, it provided us that roadmap. It gave us an opportunity to be able to involve everybody, community, government, schools, law enforcement, everybody who needs to be at the table. It gave a way for nonprofits to be engaged because, again, with government, oftentimes you hear that government is taking over and it's not giving a way for the nonprofits to be a part of the solution. So it tells them how to bring it to the table. And then, again, I think more importantly, it gives you the way to be able to track those outcomes so you can actually prove that you're doing good work.
Right. Awesome. Great example. So we're going to thank all of you for that. We're going to bring Celeste back in, and we're going to change the pace here a little bit. We're going to move to our participant question and answer. We're taking questions from some of you submitted questions sort of in advance when you registered, and we've got some other questions that have come out of the chat. Now, I've got to say this. There's no way we're going to answer everybody's questions. So we've sort of combined some of the questions. And I do sort of want to say, if you're asking questions about specific gangs that are in your particular jurisdiction, it's going to be difficult for our panel to address those questions. I would refer you to your local law enforcement agency for those types of questions. But if you can't get answers, you're always welcome to reach out to us at the Gang Center, and we have connections. We can help plug you into the right people. And if your question's not answered today, please send us a message. We'll be happy to work with you to help you through these problems that you're facing. And just as a reminder, as we finish the participant Q&A, Celeste is going to take us just for a couple of minutes through some resources that we have available for you, some follow-up resources that may answer a whole lot of these questions. It includes evidence-based initiatives that have been evaluated that you can look at modeling in your agency, a lot of resources, so keep that in mind. So we're going to start with our questions. And the first question is going to be for Miranda. You talked about actually meeting and working with your community from the very beginning. And I know in some communities there's some reluctance, well, on both sides probably. But what do you think is the best way to get community members involved and actually sitting at the table or sitting at the church, wherever you're having your community meeting? How do we get community members involved in this?
So I think it's driving home that message that you can't do this work without you. So even though government may be the funding source, your program will fail if you completely rely on government. And oftentimes, you know, some of us who work in government, we don't live in the community in which is our target area. So having the community understand that this is your community and we need you to take ownership in it, and we want to bring you to the table. So we don't just want to talk at you, but we want to talk with you. And so we also had a team of outreach workers, and our outreach workers helped us to find, you know, who were some of the influential people in the community. It may not be someone who had a title, but it was grandma who was sitting on her porch, and everybody knew that grandma was a safe haven. Well, we need to talk to grandma, and we need to figure out how we can get grandma involved in the problem. Or maybe it was the community center. So I think it's about polling the community and finding out who are the who are the influential people in the community, and helping them understand that they are a part of the solution, and then making sure that every facet of the community, you know, I talked about we had faith leaders, you know, we had business leaders, we had school leaders, so making sure that every single part of the community is represented and have a voice, and that begins by building your relationship with them and engaging them. And again, you can't drive home enough that you are a part of the solution, and we can't do this work without you.
Right, awesome. And all of you in one way or another talked about trust, and that's a real issue in communities. So you can't just hold a meeting and when nobody shows up, just give up. Sometimes you've got to go get out in the community. You've got to do this hard work and build that trust for sure. That's some great advice for sure. So our next question, Celeste. How can we enact community mobilization in a very conservative small town? And maybe to expand on that, obviously this is taking place in big cities, but what about suburban or small areas? Is the model appropriate there?
Yeah, the model's been used and implemented. Oh, you can't hear me?
No, we got you. You're good. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Yes, the model has been implemented in small rural areas. One of the OJJDP implemented the model in rural. It had a rural initiative way back when, but it's also being implemented in rural communities and those communities that are under 50,000 that I mentioned. And so whether it's a conservative, you're mentioning a conservative community, it can still be implemented. It's not so much the scale. You don't have to have a lot of partners, but you have to have key partners that are interested in reducing the gang violence in the community. So it only takes a few to really mobilize the community, and it's how active and interested they are. I think that makes a huge difference, but it's bringing out awareness, and I will stress that having the data to support what you're trying to do is really important, because you won't be just talking with people, you'll be presenting evidence and saying this is an issue, this is how it impacts you, and this is how you can improve the community. Because at the end of the day, everybody wants to live in a safe community where people are being taken care of. So I think that's how you can drive home that message.
Awesome. So another question let's bring Paul in. So you've got experience with several different models, I'm sure a lot of prevention and intervention and suppression strategies specifically. Why do so many times do these efforts fail? Or why do they fail in communities?
It's a good question. I think a lot of times it's the groundworks and the structures aren't set up front. You know, when you're partnering with people, it's not one agency working for another agency or one agency in control. It's that you're partners, right? You all bring a value to the project itself. We look for individuals and partners that are experts in their areas, right? And we rely on them, and we coordinate their work, and their work complements one another. So it's not one side, one person's more valuable than the other. And then when you look at a lot of initiatives, especially like law enforcement, suppression type initiatives that are put in place, I believe there was a question about like neighborhood watch programs or stuff like that. You look at, you know, you're trying to achieve one specific goal, and that is to reduce violence. So we do that through maybe a law enforcement approach, and eventually we're going to get to suppression. Eventually we're going to get to intervention and prevention. But I think when you're putting an initiative across the board that's something as large as addressing violence in the community, it's so vital that you enact strategies across all areas, right? So one thing in Denver that we stuck to from day one, and that project's been running now for 10 years, was that there was an agreement amongst all partners that they value each other. They don't have to like each other, right? But we all agree to work with each other in a professional way to accomplish specific goals, maybe save lives, reduce crime, whatever it is, but that we work together on that. And, you know, we reform that. So the idea is the value of what everybody brings, the recognition of the value, and is everybody's mission alignments aligned to that same goal?
Good answer, yes, for sure. So when we're implementing the comprehensive gang model, there are so many agencies that are involved, particularly schools, and we've got one question about a jurisdiction that has multiple school districts that are worked. So Jay, you work in the schools specifically. How do you, in the comprehensive gang model, how do you bring all of these agencies together? How do you make that work?
Schools is definitely a major partner or a major factor in community mobilization. With youth gangs, you know, schools is basically ground zero. And for schools to feel that they're engaged and to feel that they're being heard, it just goes a long way. And if there's an area where there's multiple school districts, it comes down to identifying the most appropriate person that could be a part of the team that could get the information that would impact that school or the community. So for an example, instead of having a principal, you may want to have your security guard. You may have one, or the counselor that deals with, or the person that deals with discipline, to pull them into the team. So it's really good. I mean, it seemed like it would be better if it was smaller districts, but if you have numerous, you're getting a bigger idea of the problem within your city.
Awesome. So I want to talk, just spend a few minutes here and talk about the relationship between police and the community, and see if we can focus on that just a little bit. So I think, Milana, I want to start with you, and I know you work with the police every single day, okay? But also as a coordinator, how do you bring the community and the police together, and especially in some communities where that relationship has just been, they've just been torn apart for so long. How do you make that happen? What first steps would you take?
Time. It takes time, and that's like one of the most important relationships that you have to build. You know, so for us, when we were implementing the model, at the time we were not employees of the police department, but we were allies with them. But that was set up front. So the community knew that although the project wasn't ran out of the police department, we were partners in the work with the police department. And then also in the relationship with the police department, it was also a clear understanding that, yes, we are trying to eradicate the gang problem. Yes, we are trying to make our community safer. But at the end of the day, the people on the other end of the spectrum, which are the gang members, they are still people. And so it's important that you treat them as people. Yes, again, there are suppression efforts that you have to do. So it's really about building that mutual respect with each other. And so then when it came to working with gang members in the community had to understand that we had an obligation to protect the safety of the community. You know, so when something happened in the community, you can't expect us just to turn a blind eye and then continue to allow the violence to erupt in the community. There is a fine level, you know, that we had to find and how we did that. And on the same hand, the law enforcement also had to understand we weren't your snitches. You know, you wasn't going to use us to kind of continue to build down or tear down the community, but because we had an obligation to be able to work with the gang members, but also to be able to keep them safe. And so I say that relationship took a lot of time. It took a lot of time to build the trust as well, you know, so that law enforcement understand that just because I have outreach workers who are familiar with the community, have very good working relationships with the community and the gang members, it doesn't mean that they are criminals and they are gang members as well. You know, they were just able to build those relationships the work. And so we work, again, alongside law enforcement, but we are not law enforcement. So really drilling down what is the nature of the relationship between the two what does it look like, and constantly reinforcing the message to the community. Like, community one, you can't do whatever you want to do, and law enforcement, you can't do whatever you want to do, but we got to figure out how to find the balance in order to make this work.
Right. So the guidance in the model is that there should be a lead agency, somebody that helps support.
Right.
And in some communities, it's appropriate for the law enforcement agency to be the lead agency.
Correct.
In some communities, it's not. Maybe a neutral agency, maybe the school district, or maybe another agency. Paul, you got any quick advice for how to build that relationship between the community and the police?
Yeah, I mean, when you're in a comprehensive model or a comprehensive approach to reduce violence and stuff, there needs to be this clear definition of roles, what every partner brings to the table on their set of expertise. They're working in partnership. They're not working for one another. So, and as Miranda sort of alluded to a lot of times, we lose that in the transparency. If lines become blurred, if the people in the community can't decide whether an outreach worker, is working for an independent organization, or is it working for the police department, what's the role of the outreach worker, that causes distrust in the community. So really defining the roles of all partners at the table, including, law enforcement and the community groups. I mean, you're bringing a project together like this, you're bringing people together from opposite spectrums, right? That's what's amazing about the model itself, right? You're bringing ex-gang members to the same table that you're bringing law enforcement. We've had a sample in Denver. We had a meeting one day where the commander of the gang unit was in the meeting, and he had arrested two of the guys in the past that were representing our outreach organizations, and they had a period, they had time to sit there and dialogue and reflect on the past and, joke about things and talk about things. But it's really refining the individual roles of every agency and what they bring to the table, and making sure those lines and definitions of those roles are not blurred. And also remembering that you come together for a trust issue. I mean, you come together for a joint mission, which is to save lives, for example, and that every partner at the table, their activities then, can damage the trust of the coalition, but you have to be able to work through that. So your coalitions need to be strong enough that if there is an issue that occurs, your willingness to work together for this particular goal or this particular mission outweighs maybe your anger at this other organization. You can still protest that other organization. You can still have opinions about that other organization, but it shouldn't impact your professional willingness to accomplish the goal of saving lives. At least
Right. So we have for the law enforcement officers and officials online, we have a little cheat sheet for the comprehensive gang model that Celeste is going to tell you about. What I will tell you from my experience is that you can't solve this problem alone. And if you don't do something, everybody in the community is going to be pointing for you, because it's always a law enforcement problem, right? It starts out, build this community collaboration. It becomes a community-wide problem, and you're working together, and you can solve the problem. So Celeste, you've worked with so many communities over the years, building the comprehensive gang model up and these relationships. Any in a minute or so, any advice for communities that are just getting started up and how to build that collaboration?
Yeah, I would say no matter the size of the community, as you asked earlier, that you can start small, that it just takes a few key people. So if you don't have everybody engaged all at the same time, just start with that small group and get those champions in the community together to get something started in addressing the issues, because you'll be driven to do that because you obviously know there's a problem that exists, even though the data may not be readily available, but that will come with time, because a lot of people are concerned that they don't have the data initially, but you obviously are coming together for a reason, and you know that there's an issue in the community. And with time, you can start to build that. But I would say take it step by step. Miranda talked about it as a slow process. It is a slow process in the sense of it takes time to build those relationships and build trusting relationships. But over time, you'll see that that it's well worth it. And I've seen throughout with the organizations I've worked with that once you build it out with sustainability in mind, and this is a long-term process, I think you'll all see a very good result at the end of the day.
Awesome. Thank you. So Jay, you have a sort of a unique role here as a street outreach expert. And just think back in the early days when you were trying to build relationships with police officers, and we have talked If you could, we got a couple seconds left here. Can you do it? Can community build relationships with their law enforcement agents that are effective at addressing this gang problem? Is it possible, Jay?
Yes, most definitely. Yes, it is. And if I could say one key factor in that is accountability. And that's one thing that the model brought to the table, was that both sides, at the end of the day, you're going to be held accountable. Dudes, if you're running amok in the street, suppression, something's going to kick in, you're going to be held accountable. Law enforcement, if you're out there doing some things that's out of pocket, the model had things in place for you to be held accountable. And once that accountability piece this was really stressed throughout, I've really seen it start coming together.
Awesome. So on behalf of the Gang Center, thank all of you for your input. I'm sure our participants are going to take a lot away. Just as a reminder to our participants, if you're having a problem and you need help, reach out to us. That's what we're here for, is to help out with that. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to Celeste. She's going to run just real quickly through the resources that are available for you. And at the very end, Will is going to close us out. We've got a quick survey. We would really love for you to fill that survey out. So thank you all. We appreciate the opportunity.
So thank you, Sean. Here are some of the resources. So we've got the National Gang Center website that you can see. I don't know if some of you may have already gone onto this site. It's got a lot of different resources. And these are the guides and manuals. Law Enforcement Officials Guide is one that Sean just mentioned. There's the assessment guide and the implementation manual, and you can download these. They're very good resources. Draw your attention also to the assessment guide, which will be useful in assessing your gang issues. And then resources and publications, we have the Outreach Worker Safety Tips, multidisciplinary gang intervention teams, which we talked about earlier, the street outreach and the OJJDP Comprehensive Gang Model, best practices to address community gang problems, and mobilizing communities to address gang problems. And so if you, there's the online evaluation. And if you want more information to be notified about future comprehensive gang model workshops, you can contact the National Gang Center via email, and there's the information for you to download. So thank you very much.
Thank you for wrapping us. Okay, great. Thank you, Celeste. Appreciate you taking a few minutes to wrap us up there with the resources. Again, I want to thank our colleagues with NGC. I'm going to put their slide up here one more time just for our audience members. This is their contact information. We also have the online evaluation that you all can see here that we will indeed have for everyone to please take this and take a moment to provide some feedback. But before we end, I do have just a couple of last-minute items that I want to cover with everyone to discuss before we wrap up. So if you're looking to get in contact with OJJDP, please be advised that the contact information is located on this slide. You can select this website here, or you can also sign up for the OJJDP TTA listserv. This will indeed allow for you to get the latest and greatest about any upcoming events that OJJDP has, including web events like this. You can also go and check us out on OJJDP TTA on Facebook, where we will keep you updated on any type of events that we have. You can learn about upcoming trainings and any additional resources that we may have within TAC. Would you like to get in contact with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention? Well, if so, you can contact the Help Desk. The Help Desk telephone number is located here, where you can dial to get the to contact us and ask any of your questions that you may have, or getting any access to resources. You can also visit OJJDP.ojp.gov to learn more about OJJDP. And you can also sign up for OJJDP's listserv called the Juve Just listserv. You can click on this link here, and it will take you directly there to to sign up for that listserv as well. Do you have a training and technical assistance need? Well, if so, you could submit a OJJDP TTA request through OJJDP TTA 360 platform. The OJJDP TTA 360 platform does allow for you to submit any type of assistance that you may need with training or technical assistance. Just as a reminder to our audience, please note that we will have this webinar and other webinars performed by colleagues at NGC available on our Intact YouTube channel. If you'd like to get access to supporting materials, you may reach out to the OJJDP TTA Help Desk in order to receive those items. Please take a moment to review the attribution and disclaimer slide here. And please join us for these upcoming webinar events. We have a webinar coming up with our colleagues at the National District Attorneys Association and also with our colleagues at the Children and Family Futures. Please click to learn more, or you can click the registration button to register for each of those webinars. We also have upcoming webinars with our colleagues at the Western Regional Children's Advocacy Center and also with the Zero Abuse project. Those webinars are indeed coming up soon, so feel free to click the register now in order to access these webinars here. And last but certainly not least, I do have one final poll question for everyone for us to conclude today. And essentially what we want to know is how do you plan on applying the information that you learned here? Please note that it gives you options to where you can select multiple options here. You don't have to choose just one, but just let us know, how do you plan to apply the information from this webinar in your work? And you can select multiple options here. That being said, I'll go ahead and leave this poll up for just a little bit for everyone. And then when we conclude, please note that you will receive a notification in order to take the survey that will allow for you to provide feedback. Again, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to our presenters and to our colleagues at the National Gang Center, and have a great afternoon. Thank you all.
The host has left the meeting, so at this time, the meeting will come to an end. Thank you, and goodbye.